Welcome to Distracted, the podcast with Angela Lockwood, the place where you will find practical brain-boosting strategies, expert insights, and real-life stories to help busy brains thrive in the age of distraction. Let's go. Lyndal, welcome to Distracted.
Thanks, Ange. It's great to be here.
Look, I guess we were having a little chat just off air briefly around some things that, questions I often get asked by people, by adults and children or parents who are looking after kids who have got busy brains. And one of the big questions that is coming up time and time again is people asking for my opinion on why do I think there's such an increase in ADHD or Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder diagnosis for women in their 40s. And it's becoming something where I obviously am so fascinated by, and I just really appreciate you being on here and sharing your story around what it is like to be a woman in your 40s who has just been newly diagnosed with ADHD. So thank you for coming on here and being willing to share your story.
It's my pleasure.
Now, I do want to give a little bit of a background, and I'm going to have to read this, listeners, because Lyndall is a super clever, super whip smart person, and she is a Juris Doctor candidate. Now, I had to ask Lyndall what that meant. So if you're thinking, what in the world is a Juris Doctor candidate? For people like me who don't know what that means, she's a postgraduate law student and not too far off graduating. And what's amazing is for you, Lyndall, is having been just newly diagnosed with ADHD, hearing a title like that is very inspiring. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions around people who have a diagnosis that their capabilities aren't the same as people without a diagnosis. I'd love to know, what are your thoughts around, I guess the question I'm being asked around, what is this increase that we're seeing in middle-aged women or women in their 40s being diagnosed with ADHD? What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, it's very interesting, especially when a lot of people are feeling like it's just popular at the moment, or it's cool to say that you have ADHD, because I think that for those of us who do suffer from it, I know that for myself it's been such a journey, and I'm still on that journey. And even like when you were saying that I'm nearly finished my law degree, I got a little shiver up my spine because it's exciting. Because I honestly wouldn't have thought 2.5 years ago maybe that this was even something that was possible right now. So yeah.
And obviously I know you through different ways. And one of the things I've seen with Lyndall, which is why I wanted Lyndall to invite you on here, is that you don't just study. You're also a mum of 2 amazing kids. You have your own companies. You're somebody who's very involved in the community. And I think that's what has really inspired me about watching you and watching your journey through all of this, is that you do so many things. And I think this is the thing with a lot of people, having that, as I said again, misconceptions around what ADHD looks like for people. And even today I read an article by Chris Guillebeau. He's a guy from America, and fascinating content that he puts out. And the title actually read, "The Trauma of Adult Undiagnosed ADHD." And I thought it was really timely that I was speaking to you today, because is that a fair way to sum up undiagnosed ADHD? Is it traumatic, or is that a bit too heavy?
No, I would say that's spot on, to be honest, because I think, and that's part of the diagnosis process is actually this huge feeling of relief. It's like, oh my gosh, there's a reason why I have bright, shiny thing syndrome. There's a reason. I felt that there was something stopping me from reaching my goals. I would have an idea, and I just never had the understanding or the wherewithal of how to get from A to B. And I was really sick of beating myself up about that. Like, it was very hard. So I think that it is traumatic, like, to think back over 20 plus years of my career. And, I actually started law 25 years ago. Well, actually 25 years ago before I started, so which was 2 years ago now. And it was the most boring thing that I'd ever sat through. And so I had to pull out. And I'd always wanted to be a lawyer. So I was pretty directionless for a lot of undiagnosed ADHD is very accurate.
So what led you to seeking a diagnosis now? Because I know in my world, I've worked so much with children who have been diagnosed with ADHD or on their own journey of being diagnosed. What was it that led you now to seek the diagnosis? Have you always known, or was it something that's just sort of, you've become more aware of?
I think it was definitely the latter. I'd become more and more aware. I just kept hearing more about ADHD in adult females and how it presented itself. And it just was such a familiar story. It was like you're talking about me. And so when I decided to go back to study, and that was a case of wanting to learn something at a much deeper level, I felt like I had a lot of surface level knowledge about in a lot of areas. And I think actually part of that is just because with ADHD, you're incredibly curious. So I think that if anything, that has continued because I'm still searching for that area of law that I'm most interested in, that I can that I can find purpose and pour my passion, I guess, into. But it's definitely, it's along those lines of, and I've lost where we started with the question now, but
I do love that. What led you you to the diagnosis? That's what it was. Yeah, what led you to getting a diagnosis? And look, Linda, I think I love your vulnerability of being on here and sharing this, because even on podcasts, we try so hard, and when we're in front of people, to do the right thing, say the right thing. Yeah. But it's not until we actually let our guards down a little bit and we be raw and we be vulnerable and we be honest that people actually go, hey, hang on a minute, that's me. Like, I can hear myself in that. So the question was, what led you to the diagnosis as an adult woman?
I think so when I decided to study, and and I also decided to study at a private university, which is very expensive. I just, the more I thought about it, the more I just wanted to give myself every possible chance to succeed. And I just, there was no chance for failure, which for me I feel like my life has been the opposite of that. Like, I've often given myself an out because things were too stressful or I couldn't figure, I was overwhelmed. So with the diagnosis, I was really looking for just support and structure, basically, and assistance through this degree process.
Did you struggle as a kid through academics?
So this is why I was never diagnosed. No, I didn't. And I think what I noticed in my life was that when it came to the point where, and it was in high school, and it wasn't until the latter years of high school, and I actually skipped a year of high school, but that was just changing schools, and I went to another country. I realized that once I had to apply myself to subjects that I wasn't interested in, there was just no chance. So I still did very well in the subjects that I have high verbal ability. So the things that I'm good at, like English and history, I didn't have to apply myself. I just did well naturally. But in like the maths and sciences in year 11 and 12, I really struggled. And that was very unusual for me. I didn't know why it had occurred. And I thought it was just because I'd skipped year 10, which was foundational in those subjects. So it sort of got attributed to that versus, a lack of focus and ability to apply myself to what I saw as boring subjects.
Yeah. So when you look back, because I think that's what a lot of people are getting confused about, that I'm hearing through conversations and the questions around, well, didn't people always know that there was something happening for them as little kids? Because we see and we hear that kids with people with ADHD are young boys. They're the ones that are rolling around on the floor in the classrooms, and they're the kids that can't sit still, and they're the kids that won't listen and pay attention. But what I'm hearing is that wasn't you at all. That was your experience was really different. And as we know, girls experience ADHD differently too. And actually, I better just stop for a moment and just say I will link more resources to the show notes of this episode too, for people who are wanting to know more about the background of ADHD and where it comes from and sort of some of those, so that if people are more interested in reading about it. But Lyndal, I guess when you're saying leaving school that you became aware that there were some subjects that were your strengths, some that weren't. What about through those times of stress? You've built a very successful company that was actually an international company. How are you, what were your experiences through that? If having difficulty attending and focus, being distracted, all of those things, how did you find your role and your space amongst, being in a different country, building a big company?
I think, to be honest, a lot of the operational management side of things with our business has always fallen to my husband, Ruben, who is a classic entrepreneur, and he loves that side of things. Whereas I've always been more on a disc profile. I'm very high I, so I'm high in influencing. I'm also pretty direct, but I'm higher in the I category. So I've always been more of the support role, the trainer, the assessor, anything that involves talking and thinking fast on your feet, but encouraging others, influencing people. That's what I do naturally. So.
Isn't that interesting, even hearing you say that? I see those as such strengths. All of those characteristics, you've even just mentioned earlier around being curious as well. Like, these are amazing strengths that you have had, being somebody who can communicate clearly and somebody who can inspire people. What are your thoughts around people seeing, attention deficit? It's in the very name of it. I don't know, is there conflicting opinions, or is there a conflicting, I'm not even sure of the word to use, of it's a deficit, but there's actually a lot of strength and a lot of capabilities for people?
I agree. I think the thing is, I've actually heard it described as attention to many things, and that is, I think, that is actually what I get struck with. It is a problem of trying to stay on task is actually the hardest thing, because you just have everything catches your attention. So yeah, and that makes the title of your podcast extremely relevant. So, because distracted is definitely something that I would use to describe myself. So yeah.
The whole reason for distracted was, and I guess renaming this next chapter of distracted is because I'm seeing such an increase in people really struggling with the identity of being distracted. And of course we've got tech that's distracting us, but there's also our thinking that's distracting us. There's sleep, and when we know that when we're not looking after our health and well-being, we become more distracted. Our energy wavers. So I'm just wondering, what are some of your health practices that you use? Because when you've got a very busy brain, it's what I talk about all the time. How do you calm that down, and what do you find works for you?
So several things. So I guess it is still a work in progress. The long walks, starting the day with a long beach walk with the dogs, and quite a few years ago, I stopped listening to podcasts or anything and just let my mind wander during that period, which I know that is really important for creativity and problem solving, because if we're always listening to something, then we're not just letting our mind go freely where it wants to go. So I find that that's really helpful. But also sleep. I'm a very good sleeper. I think that law school has definitely affected the quality of my sleep, and so I've had to, have various support for that. And because I'll wake up at 3 a.m. and my brain's trying to solve a problem from an exam 2 weeks ago. Which, what's the point of that? It's like I say to my friends, do you still dream about legislation? Because I'm still dreaming about legislation, which is terrible.
I can definitely put my hand up, Lyndal, and say I don't dream about legislation.
Well, I'm not at the moment, thank God, but around exam time, I generally do. So, yeah.
So what are some of the things that you do then, like exam time around legislation? Like, my head just basically went to sleep for 2 seconds there, because I was thinking, how in the world do you do that? With a busy brain, how have you been able to jump in and really dig deep in a very high-pressured, very content-heavy program? What are some of the things that you've done to help you get through that?
I think hyper-focus is something that really comes in handy when it finally kicks in. And I think also, because I, being a trainer and assessor before my study, I know what type of learner that I am. I'm an auditory / kinesthetic learner. I'm not such a visual learner. So it's just about using those skills. And where I'm studying, we get a fair amount, we get a portion of our grade actually comes from our tutorial participation. And for me, that is actually the kinesthetic. That's the practical application of what we've learned in the content. And so by the time 12 weeks is gone and week 13 rolls around for exams, it all just starts to come together in my brain, and it doesn't seem to happen before that often. It often is in week 13 that it all comes together, and just in time for exam week. So, yeah.
Luckily, right? But it sounds like you've got quite a intuitive way around understanding how your brain works and what works for you and what doesn't. Where did that come from?
That came from like my work as a trainer and assessor, but also working with TAFE as a disability assistant, and so working with students with disabilities, and actually being in a Year 12 English class where I was supporting someone, and they were talking about learning styles, and I did the test as well. I mean, I was pretty sure I knew what I was, but it's all of those things together, really.
And I guess looking at you've now got a diagnosis. What was it that happened for you? So in the lead up to that, what happened to you once you was given the diagnosis? What support did you seek out? And I guess what did you do personally that shifted things for you?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because it took quite a long time to get diagnosed, and I had already started seeing a psychiatrist as part of the process. So while the psychologist was doing her review and consultation report, etc. So, tried various medications, of which I found that the stimulants don't really seem to work for me. But I do take something else, which is overnight, which blocks adrenaline, which helps with the symptoms of ADHD. And so, I already had, I'm pretty sure about that time, a coaching psychologist. So we were working through strategies, and I think it really just let me be kind to myself. So when I feel overwhelmed, I don't beat myself up over it. I try and figure out how to release the pressure. How do I release the pressure valve? What can I take off my plate? What can be removed so that I can handle what's left.
It sounds like having a good team around you has been really important.
Yeah.
An expert team too, right? You didn't say I Googled it and then I decided that's what I was going to do. It sounds like you were tapping into some pretty good experts to support you.
Yeah, definitely.
Lyndal, if you're happy to share, what does it look like for you when you do hit that overwhelm? Because I think this is what often I hear with people. They think that it's just you can't sit still, or you can't focus on something. But it's a lot bigger than that, isn't it? What does it look like when things do hit that point of overwhelm?
I think it's hard to describe, but I think it's definitely an emotional state where you just can't. You just feel a huge amount of pressure, and often there's just too many thoughts that are like too many things that you're worried about simultaneously, and you become like paralyzed. Like I can't make decisions, and like to be honest, facing the end of my degree and what happens after has been fairly overwhelming for me lately. And so just because there's so much uncertainty, and I feel like I put more pressure on myself. I know I put more pressure on myself because I'm in my mid-40s and I've got to get this sorted out. I've got to hit the ground running. And then I'm like, just this whole thing has been accelerated. It's okay. Calm down. Give yourself a break. Give yourself some space to figure out the next steps.
I'd be really interested, Lyndal, in just hearing, well, what have you thought about your story in itself around being diagnosed as a woman? Have you connected with other people who are in a similar situation to you, or do people generally keep it to themselves? They might be going through the pathway, or they've received a diagnosis. Are people usually generally as open as you, or is it more a bit closed?
It seems to be pretty standard that people with ADHD are pretty open about it. So, because oversharing is a big component. And it's funny, like when I meet someone, like the other day recently in the recovery gym locally, I was talking to someone in the ice bath, as you do, and to try and distract yourself from the cold. And we realised very quickly that we both had ADHD, and it's just a case of you don't do small talk, you dive straight in. Like you go for the deep topic straight away, because we're just not interested in talking about the weather unless it directly affects what we're doing in that moment. it's, you find out very quickly who your people are.
Yeah, and does that feel like you mentioned the pressure before, does that feel like a pressure release for you when you find people, like you say, your people?
Yeah.
Does that allow you to be more of who you are?
Definitely. And I think even like just when you're able to be vulnerable with someone who doesn't have ADHD, but is very open to, is interested in it and is curious about it. And because for me, it's very much been a journey of figuring out how my brain works. And I think that's, like it's an exciting journey, and it's something that you want to share with people. And it doesn't worry me using a label, because if anything, I feel like it just explains the 6 degrees of separation of Lyndall's thinking, as my husband calls it. Like, it's just, I will, my brain makes weird connections, but they make sense to me. So when I explain them, people go, oh, okay, that's why you said that. And you're like, yeah, just that's where my brain went with that comment. So, yeah.
It's one of the things I love when speaking to you in this, is that there seems to be a level of calm around your journey, your story about sort of growing up, what you wanted to do as you're coming back into law, that there seems to be a very calm, accepting way of going, this is just how it is, and this is who I am, and this is the process I've been through. Does it feel like that for you?
Most of the time, sure. Sometimes it's the opposite, but that's most of the time when I take a deep breath, or maybe 5. Yeah, that's what comes out. So, yeah.
What's your one go-to? Just to finish up, I feel like I could talk to you forever and ask 1,000,001 questions. What's your go-to habit that really helps you focus on you and your self-care and makes you feel great?
Oh, that's an interesting one, because it used to be yoga, but unfortunately, due to study and back problems, I haven't been able to do it for ages. So I think I'm still like, and it used to also be surfing, just a little bit for fun. But I think that's what I'm still working out. Once I'm busier and have injury limitations and whatever else, what is my go-to? But it's probably, honestly, like in terms of switching my brain off, I actually have to either read a really good book or watch something really good, like a really good drama that just engages me to the point of my brain just body to relax. So Netflix binging can actually be therapeutic. Yeah.
I remember once writing about about no Netflix binging, and I went on to clarify that it was actually, it's before you go to bed, you don't want to watch the really hyped up, big frantic stuff. It's the cool, calm. So Netflix binging is fine. It's just a matter of the energy that you're putting into it.
Definitely.
Lyndal,
Definitely.
I would love to know for you, right now, at your stage where you are about to graduate, what are you most excited about for your future in all of your story that has led to now? I know this is a pretty loaded question. I'd love to know, what are you looking forward to? What are you excited about as a woman at your age and stage of life, about to embark on a very exciting new chapter?
Oh, it's a really good question. And I think, it's about, I'm really excited to finding an area of work that I'm just really excited to go to and to be involved with every day, because I think I've always watched from the sidelines with my husband, who, dives into so many projects at once, and I'm like, okay, that's too much, but what's my thing? So I think what I'm really excited about is uncovering those areas of law, hopefully, that I can really just use my problem solving and creative skill and people, people connecting skill and empathy, etc., to really pour that into the next chapter, and get paid would be wonderful as well after a couple of years of not being paid. So that would be fantastic.
Wow, that sounds very exciting. Lyndal, what's the quality of yours? Like, what's that one skill, I guess? And I know I'm asking for one thing, and this is very challenging for busy brains to come up with one thing. But what are you I guess for our listeners, they're here on Distracted. They're here for a reason and wanting to learn better ways to look after their brain, and focus and attention is their thing. For people who may have been considering along the way that there could be something that's happening for them, that they're struggling and they're wanting to go on the diagnosis route or even just support, what's your suggestion to them if they've heard things that you've talked about today and go, oh my gosh, that sounds like me and my journey? Is there anything that you can suggest to them as their next step?
So, definitely discussing it with your GP if you've got a good GP, which I have an amazing one. And also the other tip that I was given, because it's very expensive to go through the diagnosis process, so was actually that I went through the process at Bond University, where I'm studying, with the psychology department. So it was much, much cheaper. It was a fraction of the cost of and the waiting list for a psychologist. I was on the waiting list, but I was actually able to do it through Bond. And it took a bit longer. It was with someone who was doing their PhD, finishing their masters, I think. But a qualified psychologist, but still in training, and that was really helpful. So, if you're thinking that it's too hard and it's going to take too long, there are other ways to get around it.
Thanks so much, Lyndal, and good luck. How much longer do you have left at the time of this recording?
At the time of this recording, I actually think I'm still waiting on my exam timetable to come out this week, but it's like 7 weeks. Probably exactly. So.
Wow! Well, how exciting! Oh my gosh! For somebody who has been, as you say, on your own journey, to be able to successfully finish a postgrad law degree while working and having amazing family and doing all the things that you do, congratulations! And I wish you all the best for this next chapter.
Thanks so much, Ange.
Thanks. I was joined today by Lyndal Brennan. I hope you really enjoyed the conversation, and I really appreciate Lyndal's honesty and vulnerability in sharing that, because hopefully you've got some good information. It might be about yourself, it might be about a partner, or it even just might be about a colleague at work, and it gives you a little bit of awareness and openness and even empathy and kindness for what people are going through, but also how successful people can be with brains that are built different. So thanks so much. I'm Angela Lockwood. Please like or share and recommend this interview and the podcast to anyone you feel will receive benefit. But until next time, I'm Angela Lockwood. Thanks very much for joining me.